Welcome to Locality's Making Bank podcast, where we continue our exploration of South Florida's entrepreneurial landscape with host Keith Costello, co-founder and CEO of Locality Bank. Sit back, relax, and let South Florida visionaries guide you on an entrepreneurial journey from tribulation to triumph, sharing the very stories that have shaped them.
Andrew Samuel, welcome to Locality Bank's Making Bank podcast.
Thank you, Keith.
It's a pleasure having you here. And you are a very unique guest because you're two distinguishing things about you that are unusual for our podcast. One is you're from out of town. Mm-hmm. Most of the people we have are Floridians or from Fort Lauderdale. And you're a banker. So, Well, you're our second banker because we had Alan Levan from Bank Atlantic was on just a month ago. But this is exciting because you've got quite a story, and I just want to hold this book up that you wrote, Our American Dream, Cultivating a Life of Success, Joy, and Purpose. And I have had the pleasure of looking through this book as I was preparing, and I would recommend this book to anyone. Mm-hmm. It's such an inspirational story.
Yes. So I've been very, very fortunate, so a lot of good people, a lot of good associates that I've kind of been introduced to that have kind of helped me along the way.
Wow, it's great. So we always start off with the beginning, and so you've got a very unique kind of beginning. Tell us about how you grew up.
Yeah, so it seems like a long time ago, but I'm originally from India, and the unique thing is, I spent the first 6 years of my life in India. My dad was a military man, so every couple of years he was always moving, relocating, and so we traveled with him. But our conditions were very, very basic, and because he was in the military, my mom and my siblings, I have 3 sisters, we actually lived with my grandma, and those were difficult times, and we didn't have running water, and I always tell people I learned a lot about entrepreneurialism through that process.
Interesting.
Because we lived in these little homes that, there were 16 of us because it was all of my mom's siblings, their children, and us.
Okay.
And, we had one room that might have been, 12 by 16, and we cooked there. We slept there. We did our homework there, and it was interesting because we would kind of all lay on the floor and go to sleep, and then in the morning we'd get up and fold the sheets, put them to a corner, and that was our living room and kitchen.
Wow!
And it was interesting because it was actually dirt floors, and people can be very, very creative, and I don't know if people realize this, but obviously, if you're on a dirt floor, the dirt gets, the dust particles rise, etc. So one of the things we used to do was we would actually gather cow dung and then take the cow dung and smear it in circular pattern over the floor. And when you do that, when the cow dung dries, it seals the floor. So you don't have dust particles rising anymore.
Wow.
And the interesting thing is, everybody, has asked me, well, does cow dung smell? It doesn't, and...
and you said in the book you used it for fuel to burn, for heat. And,
that's right.
so...
Yeah, so that was my first entrepreneurial, I watched my uncles and aunts.
Yes.
And so, cow dung had multiple purposes, so people smeared it on the floor to seal the dust, okay? But if you make sort of flat patties out of it, it burns really well. And, firewood was really difficult to find. So it could be used that way, And so I remember at an early age, my uncles would tell us to follow, because cows are sacred in India.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of cows just wandering around. So my uncle would say, follow the cows and grab the cow dung, bring it home, and we'll make patties out of it and sell. We'll sell it to our neighbors, etc., for their floor. And so at an early age, that entrepreneur spirit was developed.
That is the most unique entrepreneurial story I've heard yet.
So I was exposed to that at an early age,
Yeah.
But so I was there till I was about 6. And then my dad was fortunate that he was turning 40. He was retiring from the Indian Army. And there was a country in Africa, Zambia, had just gotten its independence from the British. And they wanted soldiers from a neutral country to come help organize their defense force. And if most folks who know their history know that India has always been a non-aligned country, which means, during the 60s, at the height of the Cold War, India was always a neutral country, not pro-Soviet or pro-American, And so he was one of the folks that was recruited to go to Zambia to help organize the defense force. And I have to add this part to it, So my dad, it was interesting. There were 80 jobs, and they were maybe 8,000 applicants.
Wow.
And so the Zambian recruiters who spoke English primarily were there going through portfolios of these folks that were applying. And they got frustrated because if you know anything about traditional Indian names, they tend to be very difficult to pronounce, and they're long and complicated.
Right.
They got so frustrated that they decided they would just take all the simple names, and it was names like Samuel and Jacob and Joseph, etc. So all the Christian names, what I mean? And so he was selected because they could pronounce his name, not necessarily because of his skills.
Oh, wow.
So he went to Zambia, Africa originally on a 2-year contract, and they kept extending it, and he stayed there 21 years. And so I spent most of my schooling years in Zambia. And then when I was 17 and graduated from high school, I ended up coming to Messiah University in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
And how are you able to come to the United States to go to college?
So we had a neighbor in Zambia who had taught chemistry at Messiah, and they were now working for the World Health Organization in Zambia, and so I also had a friend who had come to Messiah just a year before me, and between the two of them, I decided I wanted to come here. But to come as an international student, you needed to be able to show that you had the finances to do this. We didn't have the finances. My dad was making $3,000 a year, and the tuition was $4,000 a year. So you don't have to be a mathematician to figure that one out. But Messiah actually stepped up and said, "Listen, we'll provide scholarship monies. We'll provide international aid. Just come, be willing to work summers and during the school year, and they'll help me
Wonderful.
pay." So that was great. But then you also need a sponsoring family. And I had a wonderful family in Mount Joy, Pennsylvania. And they had 4 daughters. And so they stepped up and said, we'll sponsor you to come here. So I actually came to Messiah August 24th, 1980, with $200 in my pocket and 1 suitcase.
Wow.
And and it was interesting because so I was in the country for about 3-4 weeks, and met a lot of people at the college. And one of the girls that I met is now my wife, and we've been married 44 years.
Congratulations.
We have 5 daughters and 16 grandchildren.
My goodness.
So that's my story.
Well, that's quite an accomplishment.
Yes, it is, But, I want to emphasize, all of these things aren't coincidences, because when you think about it, I'm a skinny little kid from India, and why would I be picked out of billions of people in India to have the opportunities to come here and do the things I've been able to do. And really, that's why my wife and I were very strong in our faith. And I do believe that God really ordained this and has been by my side every step of the way.
Wow.
So it is,
well, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So you graduate. You met your wife while you were going to college.
That's right. So,
and then you graduate from college, and then you got to get a job. So how do you go about getting your first job?
Yeah. So those were the days when you were looking for a job, you looked in the paper, the classifieds, right?
I remember.
Nobody knows.
Ryan doesn't know what we're talking about.
That's right. But that's right. So we got married. My wife graduated before me, and I graduated a year later. Our daughter was born when I graduated, but we had a commitment that she was going to stay home with our baby. And so I was under a lot of pressure to find a job, And so I interviewed a bunch of places, and at that time, 1984, jobs were scarce.
Yeah.
I mean, the economy was tough. And so this small restaurant chain, offered me a job as a management trainee. And so I took that job, and within like a month, they made me the nighttime manager. So I did the 11 to 7 shift. But I liked it because I would work from 11 to 7 in the morning. I'd come home and then look through the paper, make, call job opportunities. Because in my mind at that time, I was like, I didn't go to a 4-year college and get an accounting degree to be a restaurant manager. That was not what I envisioned, And so that's what I would do during the day is apply for jobs, But I'll tell you, that restaurant job taught me so much, And when I say, when you're on the 11 to 7 shift, if you can motivate waiters, waitresses, cooks, busboys on that shift, you can manage anywhere. You know what I mean? And so I learned how to motivate these people in those circumstances, especially because think about it. If you're open 11 to 7, when the bars closed at 2 a.m., guess where people went?
Right. They
came to your restaurant, and most of them were drunk. They were thrown up everywhere. They were rude, etc. But you had to manage in that environment, So I learned a lot there. And keep in mind, too, when I came to the country in India and even in Zambia, we ate with our fingers. So I didn't know much about silverware or, where the napkin should be, etc., because I wasn't used to that. But the restaurant experience taught me, how to set the silverware on a table, even simple things like desserts. I didn't know what a banana cream pie was or a peanut butter pie because I was never exposed to that. Mm-hmm. But because I worked in this restaurant, I got to know the foods better. I got to know, just the simple things that would benefit me later in my career, Sure. But that experience was one of the best I had, And so I kept looking for a job, and, I would call. One of the things I did was I would call banks, and they would never pick up, and whatever reason they didn't want to answer, So I got smart and I said, okay, you know what? I'm not going to call people 8 to 5. I'm going to call after 5, before 7, because I figured out that, listen, the managers of the departments, etc., probably worked late. Because the executive assistants were screening these calls, and I wasn't getting to who I needed to. Right. So I decided to call after 5, assuming that managers would be working late. And those were the days when the phone would keep ringing. There was no voicemail in it. So just and so I would call at like 6, and it would ring and ring and ring. And it so happened a gentleman who was the number 2 in the HR department at a small bank called Commonwealth National Bank. At that time, it was $1 billion bank, picked up the phone, and I could hear when he picked it, what do you want? It was like, because he was staying late and he couldn't let the phone keep ringing. And I said, look, I'm looking for a job. And he said, we don't have any openings. We just don't, So I said, listen, just give me half hour, just half hour. And then we'll go from there. And he was kind enough. He said, sure, come on in. So I went in, and that half hour ended up being a 2-hour interview. And unbeknownst to me, and he didn't say anything to me during the interview. We had a good interview. I walked away. His best friend happened to manage the restaurant that I worked at. But he was the general manager. I was the nighttime manager.
Wow.
And so he immediately called him and just said, hey, this kid was here. And fortunately, that gentleman said to him, oh, you got to hire him. And, he shouldn't be here. You got to hire this guy.
Wow.
And so I got hired. They created a job for me. And they actually ended up starting a management training program. And I was the second hire there. And that's how I got my start in banking.
Wow.
So I stayed in that job for about 2 years. Commonwealth National was then sold to Mellon Bank. And I was a community banker. I love community banking. And I just felt like things were going to change with Mellon.
Mellon was huge, a huge bank, right?
Yeah, at that time. So I left them and joined another bank and ended up managing branches for them. And I spent about 10 years there.
And this is all in Pennsylvania?
All in Pennsylvania, all in Pennsylvania. And one of the gentlemen that had hired me at the old Commonwealth National Bank was now appointed CEO of a thrift in Harrisburg called Harris Savings Bank. And so I joined him to take that company public and run the commercial side of the bank. And so I ran the commercial side. And actually, when I say ran it, I built it from scratch. They were a thrift. 99% of their loan assets were residential mortgages. And so I came over to start the credit department, the commercial banking side, And
so you were doing commercial loans yourself? You were a commercial lender as
yes,
well?
I was.
Yeah.
Yep. So what I always enjoyed was just meeting with small business owners and just the various ways in which people are making money, how creative they are, how passionate they are about their products and what they bring to the community.
Isn't that the great thing about our business?
Absolutely.
Is really that ability to work with these small business owners that are passionate about their business and be able to help them.
Absolutely.
I see that in your expression.
That's right. I still love that. And but those were fun days,
Sure.
And so we grew this. So I was running the commercial group, and we were growing this thrift. Now it was a commercial bank. And as time went on, my boss, who was the CEO, came to me and said, "Hey, why don't you take over the leadership of the wealth management?" Sure. And he came to me and said, "Why don't you run the retail side?" So I did that. And so we went through all that. And then I had gone to the role of chief banking officer, which was basically, I had all of the revenue side. And at the time we sold that to a company called Sovereign Bank Corp. I was president of Waypoint Bank, and we sold it to Sovereign. And I was there about 6 months and then decided, it just wasn't a good cultural fit based on my values, my focus on community banking, etc.
Sovereign was again a bigger
Yes, it was a
institution.
$90 billion bank, stretching from New Hampshire down to Maryland. So I actually left with 35 employees and started a de novo bank.
And this is 2005?
2005.
Yeah. Okay.
So started, so we applied for our charter in May and we received it in November.
Wow, that was fast.
Yeah, those days, you could do that. Not now, you know what I mean? So
how much money did you have to raise to start?
We raised $18 million.
Wow, it's quite a bit for that time.
At that time, yes. Yeah. And we opened with 3 offices, which was unique in those days. And so we 18 million we raised, 3 offices, and we were off and running. And so over the next 6 years, we grew it to about $3 billion.
Wow.
And ended up selling that to a company called Susquehanna Bank Shares.
And I think, did you take that company public, the De Novo?
The De Novo we did take public.
Was that your first time going public?
Yes, it was. So we took that company public about 3 years into it.
Okay.
And listed on NASDAQ, and then grew it. And as I said, then sold it to Susquehanna Bank Shares. Mm-hmm. Because at that time, Dodd-Frank was being discussed. Oh. And I was convinced that, we were shifting to an environment where, scale was going to be very important.
But you made it through the downturn.
Yes, we did.
2008, 2009.
Yep.
And which is a very tough time for a lot of banks. A lot of banks did not make it through that. Yeah, we didn't have any issues during that time. That's great.
So we actually were $3 billion. We had a $15 billion bank interested in us. We put it together, created an $18 billion bank, 37th largest bank in the country. But one of the critical things our board said was they wanted our management to be a critical part of the combined company. So all of our management team had key roles with this combined company. Okay. I became the president of the holding company and chairman and CEO of the bank. And so we put that together. And then
even though they really bought your bank, they made you CEO.
Yeah, the CEO of the bank and president of the holding company.
Wow.
So 3 years into it, we ended up selling that bank to BB&T, which is now Truist.
Yeah.
At that time, I left and came down to Florida.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because a friend of mine, Ken Lehman, know Ken, he and I were chatting, and he said, "Hey, listen, there's a thrift in Plant City, Florida." And I didn't even know where Plant City was, He said, "They're looking to go public and they want to grow." And he said, they said to me that they want a values-based company that grows aggressively. And he said, I immediately thought about you. He said, "I think you'd be a great person for them to get some knowledge from." So I said, "Sure, I'll go down, and I'm happy to help anybody grow their business." And so we had a power lunch at Cracker Barrel, and their audit chair, their chairman, and I met, and we chatted, and I was giving them ideas about making sure you hire the right leader, the culture, etc. And at the end of the meeting, they kind of pushed a copy of the proxy from Susquehanna Bank Shares to me and said, "Hey, listen, we know how much money you're making on. We can't afford that, but we'd like you to help us." And I said, "Sure, just call me anytime." He said, No, as in come work for us. And I said, "Listen, I'm running a company that's got 250 branches. It's $18 billion inside, $2 billion market cap, and you have a thrift with 5 offices and $190 million in assets. I'm not sure I'd be interested in that, So we left it at that,
Yeah.
I went back home, and my wife asked me, she said, "How was your meeting with those folks?" I said, "Good, great people," and I said, and, a week later she said, "You know what? I think you should talk to them." So I said, You really want me to talk?" She said, "Absolutely." So we came down to Florida, met with the full board, had a great dinner, and we made the decision to move down to Florida.
Wow.
And so that was in 2014, October 2014. Took the company public, grew it to about $1.1 billion, and sold it to Center State, which is now South State.
Yeah.
And we sold that. And then I moved back to Pennsylvania, primarily because I had a lot of clients. In our business, you build these relationships, not just with the first generation of owners, but, the second generation, the third generation. And they become relationships, they're not just clients,
Right.
And I had employees who had worked with me for years So they all said to me, the employee said, listen, there isn't a good, solid community bank in the Harrisburg area. The customers said the same thing. And they said, we love the values of Greystone and the culture. So why don't we recreate that, And I said to them, listen, I'm happy to do that, but I don't want to recreate the past necessarily. Let's create something unique. And so I said to them, look, I know how to make money in banking. We know how to make money in banking, but there's got to be a bigger purpose than just making money, Incidentally, every bank that I've been at, our mission statement has always been very short and to the point, to positively impact people's lives. Whether they're customers or not, if you can put a smile on the face of the UPS guy that drops off the package, eventually he's going to say, this is my favorite stop. And when he says that, is the time to say, by the way, where's your checking account? So
that's great.
So it's impact anybody we touch positively. They don't have to be a customer, just impact. So that I've carried it at every company. So this one, I was like, look, we know what the mission statement is, but what are the specific purposes behind this company? And so we came up with 3 reasons to do this. Number 1 was to make a difference in community banking. I love community banking, and I felt like community banking was kind of a dying industry. But I felt like, if we could build a model and show people that you can be a community bank and thrive, that would be important, Mm-hmm. But the key was technology. I think community banks have to leverage technology. The idea of, we're strong relationship builders, so we can outperform JP Morgan or Bank of America, only goes so far. I think you've got to have the technology too. So we actually built our company around technology. I mean, and there are simple things, even if you think about the simple concept of being on the cloud, only about 40% of banks are on the cloud, and that's a basic issue, you know what I mean? So we said, let's build a bank with the technology and then share our model to anybody. So if you have a bank in, pick a spot, Edmond, Oklahoma, and you want to leverage our technology or get some ideas from it, we'll happily share that with you.
Yeah.
Because I do believe that community banks are really the heartbeat of the entrepreneurial spirit in our nation. I mean, entrepreneurs, when they have an idea and they need capital, they go to small community bank. Eventually, they grow up and deal with Bank of America, but at that stage. So if we don't have community banks, I really do believe that entrepreneurial drive will drive up because people won't have access to capital.
Andrew's preaching to the choir.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're reading out of the same hymnal.
Absolutely. So I think about, like I grew up in Africa and I grew up in India, and a lot of entrepreneurs that have great ideas, but they don't have access to capital.
Right.
Because they don't have a community bank system, And so
all of these ideas you're talking about, this is the formation of LINKBANK, right?
Right, that's right.
And it was Link a de novo as well?
Yeah, it essentially was, because we went to the regulators and said, we want to do a de novo bank, but we want to do it fast. How fast can we do it? And they said, well, how much capital are you raising? We said, we can raise $50 million, But we said, we need to open really fast. And they said, well, Andrew, you're looking at minimum 2 years. You're going to need 2 years to open a de novo just to go through the process. And we said, that's too long. I said, is there a different way to do that? They said, can't. And so we said, well, what if we bought a charter and relocated it to the Harrisburg area? They said, well, you could get it done in 12 months, So we said, that's fine. So we found a small charter. It was a holding company that was bankrupt, and the bank was a $50 million bank with 12 employees. So we went through the bankruptcy process in front of the bankruptcy judge and secured that charter for $1.1 million.
Wow.
Okay. and then relocated it to Harrisburg, cleaned up the portfolio, and then started growing from that.
And then
50
raised
million
capital, and wow.
And just to step back, so the three purposes behind what we were doing was to make a difference in community banking.
Yeah.
Number two was to give back to the community. And so one of the first things we did was we set up the Link Foundation, and a certain percentage of our profits go into the foundation. And then the foundation then disperses those funds with an independent group of trustees in various parts of our community, focusing on financial literacy, women's issues, and leadership development. We have given close to $1 million to that foundation in the last 5 years, And Keith, as a de novo, you just don't have the dollars.
Right.
But we made a commitment that we were going to make that a priority.
Wow.
And so giving back was the number two purpose. And number three was the one that I get very excited is to develop the next generation of banking leaders. So when we started our company, even when we got to about $1 billion in assets, the average age of our employees was like 40. And that's very young in a bank, And part of that was we've been hiring young people, training them, pouring into them, and teaching them the skills, but more importantly, the values and why community banking is so important. So now we have about 320 employees, but we've got a lot of young people that are very, very sharp. But for me, what it was, I knew I couldn't do this forever. And so the idea was, if I'm going to do this de novo, I want to sort of pour into the next generation of banking leaders. I was fortunate. I had great mentors when I was growing up in the industry, and they taught me the value of honesty, integrity, doing the right thing, caring for your employees, showing compassion, all those things. Well, it was important that we pass that on to the next generation. So those were the three purposes behind that.
Oh, that's incredible.
And so we've been fortunate. We opened, at the end of 2018.
Okay.
And so now we're about $3 billion in assets, about less than 30 offices.
And you're publicly traded again. You took the bank public.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we cover 5 states, and really. It's been wonderful, and I've been awfully blessed, and those blessings really for my wife and I, both of us, it's really blessings from our Lord and Savior. He's opened doors every step of the way.
Incredible. And so let me ask, so how much longer do you plan to keep going like this?
I enjoy what I'm doing, and I thought I was retired. So when we sold Sunshine Bank, the deal closed January 1st, 2018 at 12:01 a.m. And from 12:01 a.m. To about 3 p.m. on Tuesday, January 2nd, I was okay. But at 3 p.m., I looked at my wife and I said, I can't do this. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I don't have any appointments. There's no phone calls. There's no emails. And that's when I started this process, So, Keith, I feel good. We have a great group of employees. I enjoy what I'm doing. We're impacting our community. And so I'd like to do it as long as we can.
That's great.
We have a great group of leaders. So a succession plan for our company. I mean, we could go the next 30 years, and we've got leaders who can step into those roles. So we'll do it as long as I'm enjoying it and we're having an impact.
Well, that's great. And it's great to hear you talk, because you really talk about a lot of the same things that we hold dear to us. Mm-hmm. We've also started as a technology bank. We're in the cloud.
Yeah.
We also care so much about the community and really the entrepreneurs who we found during PPP couldn't get money. Right? The local businesses were all starving for money.
That's right. Yeah.
The big companies had no problem getting money. And that was really what led to us getting involved. But thank you. So, I mean, what an amazing story and I could say from selling cow dung to listing a number of banks on the NASDAQ, ringing the bell at NASDAQ. It's an incredible story. And, what an incredible life you've had. And it's still we're probably about halfway through.
Oh,
We
yeah,
probably got a
halfway
lot
through.
more to
There's a
go.
lot to go. Actually, I've gained so much knowledge over the years.
Yeah.
It would be a shame to retire and put it on the shelf. No,
Exactly.
share it as much as I
And
can.
banking is really such a fun business.
Yep.
And I think the same way myself. I mean, we're
Yeah.
probably around the same age, and I can't imagine not doing this.
Right.
It's so much fun. I have so many friends, and just like you, the community banking organizations like Florida Bankers Association, ICBA, ABA, and you meet so many great people.
Absolutely.
And we share too. All those people in the organizations like that share information, want to help each other.
Absolutely.
And it's quite a network of really good people who are really trying to help their communities, build businesses, and have a really good, really great intentions with what they're doing.
Right. So. Absolutely. Our nation needs community banks, and
so let me ask you, so what do you think? Because we're not seeing the formation of de novo banks like we used to see. What do you think? Do you have an idea about how to stimulate that?
I don't know that I have an idea to stimulate that. But I think there is a pathway. I think we're eventually, and I don't know if it's in my lifetime or soon after, but I think we're transitioning to this cluster of large banks, really large banks. I'm talking about, $500 billion and up, that have their space. I think there's going to be fewer middle of the road banks. And then I think there's going to be banks in the smaller end, but those are going to be primarily privately held, family-owned banks. Where the idea is, look, we want a decent return, but at the same time, we're also focused on doing good things in our communities, et cetera. But they are going to be privately held and family-owned banks. But the idea of going to a $2-3 billion bank that's publicly held, and now you're competing for investing dollars, the question becomes, you're after the same people that are investing in larger banks. And the question for them is going to be, why should I invest in you when I can invest here? And I feel like the message is that these banks are more secure, because if there is an issue, they're important to the system. And so I think that's where we're headed, is they will be community banks, but they'll be more privately held and family-owned banks.
Interesting. One thing I've noted from just looking at the returns of large, really, I think is a common fault in the way people look at banks, is that is scale in terms of profitability.
Right.
And if you really look at those things and you look at the largest banks, the scale is not helping the profitability at all. And that's true throughout banking. I mean, there's no correlation between size and return on equity when you really get into the numbers. So I think, the case can be made for having a small bank and earning actually a better return than a lot of these larger organizations.
Right. Yeah. So. The hard part is, when we had the liquidity crisis last year because of Silicon Valley, when you have things like that, and you have public statements that are made that kind of imply that that if you have the scale, you're more secure. People read into that and they begin to think that, community bank is more risky in terms of my deposits. And so we've got to look at that whole situation, But I hope somebody wakes up to realize that, look, community banks are important. Entrepreneurs need them. So guess what? Let's figure out a way to have an even playing field, and not send the wrong messages.
Right,
you know what I mean?
So we're going to go now to the lightning round, which you've been briefed on, I think, right? Okay. So these are just quick answers we finish off the podcast with. So what's your favorite book?
My favorite book, the Bible. That's easy.
I was going to guess that.
Yeah.
Is there a song from your youth that you think of that's like your kind of theme song?
Oh yeah, there's growing up, I was a big Bob Marley fan.
Ah,
I love his music, and people ask me, why is it you love his music? And I tell them, if you listen to the words, if you were raised in poverty, if you struggled in life, and a lot of those songs are driven around that.
yeah.
So I would say, one of my favorite songs is really "No Woman, No Cry" by Bob Marley.
Yeah.
And the reason is it helps me relate to my mom and her struggles in raising us in those early years, So,
Oh, wow.
okay, so
Very good.
yeah.
What's the best piece of advice you ever received?
Oh, I think the best piece of advice would be, I've received advice from many people, and I think the best advice would be just treat everybody like you'd want to be treated, show kindness, love, and care, because, life is fleeting and these things come back. And I try to convey that to my children too, is be generous, be kind, be loving to anyone, because you never know, when you run into a path again with them, under different circumstances.
Sure. If you could have dinner with any person, living or dead, who would that be?
Oh gosh, that one's very difficult. Well, first of all, let me say, my wife would be the first one. Okay, I would have dinner with her. But in the context of what you're saying, I'm trying to think if who I'd want to have dinner with. Ugh. To be honest with you, one of the things that I love is having dinner with my children and grandchildren. There's 16 grandchildren.
Wow.
And my 5. That, I look forward to that. You know what I mean? It's chaos, but I look forward to that. So that's the one that, because I know people might say Warren Buffett, but
Right.
those, for me, don't really mean as much as just my grandchildren and my children. You know what I mean?
So I already know the answer to my
Yeah.
next question, which is, what are you grateful for? Would be your children and grandchildren, and your
Absolutely.
wife, your family.
That's right.
I can see that
That's
already.
right. And my parents,
Right.
because they, especially my mom, she worked very hard to get our family as far away as possible from poverty,
Yeah.
and so she worked very hard to say, I never want you all to grow up and realize what poverty is, because I've been there and I don't want you there, So,
Yeah.
so my parents, I'm very grateful for.
So you've spent a lot of time in different places around the world. Do you have a particular place that you have not visited yet that you would like to go?
Oh, yes. My wife actually was kind enough to give me a board of the world map, and she gave me some pins that are color coded.
Okay.
And so I have a pin for everywhere that I've been, and also everywhere I want to be. And there's so much of the world I still haven't
What's
seen.
the number one?
Oh, the number one. That one is a very, very, there's so many places, I think the number one would probably, I would like to get to Machu Picchu in Peru
wow.
sometime.
Yeah.
I haven't been there.
Okay.
I've gone into South America, particularly Mexico and Guatemala,
Yeah.
to see all the Mayan ruins and all. I've seen the Aztec creations, but I'd like to go see the Inca stuff sometime, so.
So what's a fear that you have overcome?
It's sort of, and this is common for entrepreneurs, we tend to be always focused on big, audacious goals, and we think far ahead, and sometimes we articulate that, and then we sit back and say, how are we going to get this done, but we get it done, and so that's something that I always have is, it's hard even as a public company now. I have some private sort of goals for our company, and privately I'm like, can we really get there, et cetera. So you have those fears, but you always get there once you make up your mind that that's what you're going to do. So.
And I know you love your work.
Yeah.
But when you're not working, what do you like to do? Any hobbies?
Yes, I love soccer.
Okay.
And I love professional soccer. So I try to get to Europe as much as possible to see some of the European teams. the MLS is okay, and I think Messi coming to Inter Miami and working with them, this is good for the country because I think you're going to see more quality players. But I love soccer. I love watching soccer, and I travel quite a bit to see soccer games.
Okay, you're a big soccer fan.
Yep,
okay.
It is.
So how can people get in touch with you, Andrew?
I'm always transparent. They can get me reach me, email asamuel@linkbank.com, asamuel@linkbank.com, or they can call me 717-798-4230. I'm happy to share any of my experiences.
That's very nice to hear. Yeah. Maybe some young guy will call you at 6:00 and ask for a job.
Hey, that's fine. No, I talk about community banking. Yeah. I've always had my cell phone out there. I actually had a client call at, I think it was like 3 a.m.
Wow.
And say, Andrew, need your help. My daughter is in Rome. Her ATM card is not working. Can you look into it? And I could relate to this individual because if it was my daughter,
right.
In a foreign country, doesn't have access to cash, I know how much stress I'd be under.
Yeah.
So I was glad he had it. So so we were able to take care of that very quickly for them.
That's impressive.
But so it does help.
Well, we really enjoyed having you as our guest today, and what an amazing life! And thank you for sharing your story with us.
Absolutely, thank you, Keith, for having me.
All right, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Locality's Making Bank podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to catch the latest episodes, and visit localitybank.com today to learn more about all the benefits of banking local.